It is with great pleasure to introduce historian Ryan Conroy tonight for a presentation on the history of immigration in northern Chester County. Ryan is on the board at the Phoenixville Historical Society and Springford Historical Society. Ryan also works with Mayor Peter and the Chamber of Commerce in Phoenixville. He currently has a new local history show on Voxy Pop called Timeless Tales of Phoenixville, which you can find on Facebook and Instagram. 4 episodes are currently out, and new episodes are coming soon. So without further ado, Ryan Conroy.
Okay. Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in tonight. This is my second talk for Tredyffrin Library, so I'm really grateful for them hosting me and letting me talk about history and sharing that all with you tuned in tonight. So, of course, tonight we're going to be talking about the history of immigration in northern Chester County, which, immigration in our area is a very big part of our area and our history and our growth. And, I tried to focus this talk specifically on northern Chester County because if I did all of Chester County, we'd be here for all night. So I wanted to focus it specifically on northern Chester County because there's plenty to talk about. And we're going to talk about very specific areas like Phoenixville, Spring City, and Tredyffrin, and a little bit, kind of those areas around there. So we're going to start off with like a real like kind of a little bit of a timeline. We're going to start with like some real early history and then go into later history into the 1900s. And I have my screen shared with you, so we're going to look at a lot of photos while I talk. I'll point out a lot of things, and of course, we take questions, and I'll try to answer those as presented. And I definitely welcome any questions or input or things that you'd like to contribute to the talk. So yeah, let's get started. So we have such an early area when it comes to history and the development and population of the United States in general. And I wanted to start with this map, which is the earliest map that was made of Pennsylvania. As you can see, it's still being called the part of the province of Pennsylvania in America. This is a map made in 1680s in England. And as you can see, like there's names like, New Jersey spelled with an A. You'll see a lot of, words and names and stuff that are actually incorrectly spelled. But this map is just a really amazing piece that shows our real early development of our area. And as you can see here, here's, areas of Philadelphia, there's the Delaware River, and we're going to go over to where we're going to be. And, here is Radnor Township up here where it says the Welch tract is actually supposed to be the Welsh tract. That is actually part of Tredyffrin Township. That's what would become of Tredyffrin Township. As you can see right below, it says Easttown Township. And of course, above here, we're going to go up a little bit farther up in the Chester County where you can see Vincent, which is Vincent Township, and this whole area, which is not even established yet with townships because this is so early. So starting with the areas of Tredyffrin, that land was exactly what it's labeled as. It was originally referred to as the Welsh Tract. It's the reason why it was called that was in 1682 when William Penn comes to Pennsylvania. Before he comes to Pennsylvania in England, through all his Quaker contacts, when he is, paid the land in lieu of debt, the properties now are like he's got this big piece of land, and he's trying to encourage other Quakers to come into southeastern Pennsylvania when he's going, so they can establish this new world, this new country, based on religious freedom and based around the Quaker religion. So you'll see, all these areas. Well, most of these areas are going to have some sort of free societies, Quaker meeting houses. And then if you get into some of the areas like Germantown, you're going to see a little bit more of the Mennonite areas. So, but in Tredyffrin, it's such an early area. And like I said, officially established with the name of Tredyffrin Township in 1707. What's really interesting is the name itself the name itself really kind of gives you an idea of how our towns and our areas wound up being named, because they're coming from other countries and are being named by these immigrants based on their areas or their language. So the actual name of Tredyffrin is interesting. So uh, ten, or Tre, is the Welsh word for town or township. That's what that means. Different means a wide cultivated valley. And so from those words comes Tre, or tree, and different, valley, or Tredyffrin. So they combine the words into multiple meaning there, and it ultimately means a township in a wide cultivated valley. That's what Tredyffrin means, and that's where the name comes from. As you can see, at that time, it was a very open area. It was all farms, very, very rural. And so it's a really interesting name. So you'll see those names like that, especially down in the Tredyffrin area, like Bryn Mawr and Ballackinwood, and all those names like that. A lot of those names are Welsh, and so you'll see a lot of those interesting names where, as you know, if you're from this area, you all know how to pronounce those names. But I'm sure you've met people who are like, "Wait, how do you pronounce Tredyffrin? Like, what is it?" And it's always funny to hear people how to pronounce them, and mainly because it's a foreign language kind of to this area. So very interesting, and you can see the immediate impact of immigrants coming into our area into Chester County. So in Tredyffrin, like I said, they were all primarily all Welsh Quakers, and those Welsh Quakers, went all the way over into Radnor Township. They went over to Marion Township. At that time, it was no upper and lower; it was one township of Marion, and between those three had some of the earliest settlements in the United States, and so they were all Welsh. And then not that far from here, you go over into like what be known as Germantown. Germantown was its own community; it was not part of the city of Philadelphia, and of course they were all Germans, and they were Mennonite. And you did have some Quakers in that area as well, but there's a reason why they called it Germantown. So just a real early history there. And if you go into farther up in northern Chester County, in the areas like what would become Spring City, those areas were once encompassed by Vincent Township, and that area was primarily you had a combination of Mennonites and Quakers, a lot of Germans in that area, and then if you go over the river, or I'm sorry, if you go but not even a mile over, a couple of miles over, you got Phoenixville, and Phoenixville wasn't called Phoenixville yet, and early days it was part of the Manavon tract, and those areas were also, that name Manavon is actually Welsh. So you had some Welsh Quakers up in that area of what would become Phoenixville as well. So, but primarily, even in that Phoenixville area, you had predominantly a lot of Welsh and Germans and Scotch Irish in this time period of the early 1700s. So this, religious denomination, these backgrounds would dominate the area for a while. You're talking, definitely over 100 years until we started receiving more immigrants into our area. So it was a long time. It was a long time before our area in Chester County had seen new people. And so these were very well established communities and areas for a while. So when the new immigrants started coming in the 1800s, it was a big change. And it was really when those ones that came in the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, where it really changed our dynamics in Chester County. So I'm going to show you guys, this is another map of Tredyffrin. As you can see here, this is the British camp at Tredyffrin. As you can see, they very much butchered the name of Tredyffrin in that spelling in this map. But you can see that here's Route 30, Lancaster to Philadelphia. You see that road there. There's Paoli. These are the British encampments in there before the Battle of Paoli areas. And there's St. Peter's of the Great Valley Church, which is a very early church in our area. And I'm going to show you guys a couple maps, so I like maps. And we did this map. The Chester County did these maps, and it was kind of started by a an exhibit that I worked with um, at the Chester County Historical Society. We did a very cool, fun, large exhibit on the history of immigration in Chester County. Everything from that early period where we start even before the Europeans came back to the Lenape Indians, all the way into modern times with a lot of Asian and Indian immigrants that came here even into the 1990s. We encompassed everything. So they Chester County did these amazing maps based on census records, naturalization records, and they're awesome. And they do them by sections of years, and they're broken down by these sections because it shows you, um, those time periods and the differences. And this is a naturalization map, that dates from 1798 to 1890. And even on this map, you're going to see Chester County here, and you have Phoenixville up here, right there up in the corner where that big green mark is. And there's Tredyffrin, are obviously very close to each other. And you'll see another big green circle. So those circles and those colors mean the nationalities. And I'm going to scroll down here and you can see what that green is, Ireland. So huge populations of Ireland. And they, by this, in that time period, that was the most amount of immigrants that were coming into our areas of Tredyffrin and Phoenixville and Spring City, number wise, ones that were actually getting naturalizations. Great Britain, which would have encompassed, of course, England and Wales and Scotland, Germany. You'll see those little blue dots spread around. You see a huge dot there in Vincent Township, and France and Switzerland and the Netherlands, the Dutch. So pretty cool map. And here's a graph to show you, a pie graph to show you that exact same map in a different form. And you can see that, look how big the green is there for Ireland. So it's pretty cool. We're going to talk a little bit about the Irish immigrants coming into our area starting now. And so this is a really neat engraving that was done in 1850. It's from a map of Phoenixville, and this shows the railroad bridge, the Reading Railroad Bridge, going into the Black Rock Tunnel that went underneath the north side of Phoenixville, also known as Tunnel Hill. As you see, they named it on the map here. So Tunnel Hill is on the north side of Phoenixville. That's where I grew up, and that area would see the first population of Irish immigrants in Phoenixville for sure, but also pretty much in Chester County. And some of the earliest Irish immigrants came to Phoenixville somewhere around the 18 teens, like 1818 period. And there was a really cool early settlement that they formed that is, there's like one house ruin down there, two house ruins that are still left down there that you can see. I mean, there's not much, but if you walk down the trail in the back off of 113 near the river, you can walk down this trail and you can see it, and it's right on the other side of the tunnel. So you would actually be coming out, this train's coming out going over into Montgomery County. So Scape Level would actually be on the other side of the river, going down a little farther. So like I just said, the name of it was actually called Scape Level, and it was a really interesting area that was spelled Sceilp. The reason why it's pronounced differently is because it's an Irish word that's a very old Irish word that translates roughly into water coming over near rock's edge. That's what that means. So they named it after how close their settlement was to the Schuylkill River. So just a neat little area. And then not long after that, you would have the Irish coming into Phoenixville in more droves in the 1840s. A lot of this had to do with the potato famine that was occurring in Ireland starting in the late 1830s, but primarily in the mid 1840s is when we started seeing a huge population of Irish come into Chester County. And most of them, the big majority of them, came into Phoenixville. And one of the big attractions for them to come into Phoenixville was the Phoenix Iron Company. So by that time, the Phoenix Iron Company was booming. They were producing rails for the expansion of the railroad, and there was a lot of work. They needed workers. They would actually send representatives from the iron company to the docks of Philadelphia where the immigrants were coming into, and literally signing them up for work as they were walking off the boat and bringing them on the train from Philadelphia on the Reading Railroad right into Phoenixville. So this happened in large numbers, and before long, Phoenixville had a large population of Irish on the north side. And it wasn't long after that you can see this photo here that shows the Phoenix Iron Company a little bit later on, and you can see some people that know Phoenixville. Of course, I'm sure there's some people, Phoenixville people, on the call, on the talk tonight. On the right there is you can see the Foundry building, and then of course all those buildings over there, which they're obviously all gone now except for the Foundry. And this is also from that same map, and I'm going to show you that. I'll point out a couple of things, and you can see a lot of these names on here are Irish names, and over here is where kind of the edge, not too far from the river over here on the right. And then coming up the hill is where you're going to see all the population growth. And these areas of like Dayton Street, which would become Dayton Street, was originally called Black Rock, and High Street, St. Mary's Street, which used to be called Church Street, Penn Street. And these are all the areas that I grew up. I grew up right on High Street there in the middle. And you can see this as RC Church. That means Roman Catholic Church. That is St. Mary's Church. And kind of give you a little visual. This is a photo from my personal collection that dates to the 1860s, showing some very common laborers at the time wearing work outfits, holding all their tools. You see a lot of pipe wrenches and big wrenches there. So just a really neat image. And here's St. Mary's Church. So St. Mary's Church was built in 1840. And the church itself was completely, all the funds, all the manual labor was all raised and built by these Irish immigrants. What's amazing is that they picked a very unique architecture for the church. It's more of like a mission church style, which would be more common for like southwestern United States or Southern California. So it's a really neat, very unique historical structure. Church is still an active church, very early graveyard. It's very cool to explore that area. And that church, it's a beautiful church. So the Irish that were in Phoenixville really established this community now. They have their own church. They have an Irish club. And the entire north side of Phoenixville is 100% Irish. And then by the 1860 census, 45% of the population of Phoenixville were Irish. And one of those guys I like to point out is what this piece is related to. Patrick Phillips was one of those Irish that came to Phoenixville, and Patrick, along with some of the other Irish immigrants that came here, a lot of them came from County Donegal in Ireland, because what they would do is they come from the same villages, and they'd all come together to a place like Phoenixville, and a lot of them knew each other already. So you're going from one community to another community, and Patrick Phillips he owned a store on Ann Street in Phoenixville. And when the Civil War broke out, in relation to immigrants, a huge most of the population of the Union Army were some sort of immigrant. You had huge populations of German and Irish that would enlist in the Union Army. And you had companies within a regiment, like his company of the 71st Pennsylvania. Company K was completely raised on the north side out of St. Mary's Church. They were all Irish, and Phillips would become the captain of the company. This is a piece, one of my prized possessions in my personal collection. Is his original silver inscribed Corps badge from the war. It's a war period badge depicting the Second Army Corps, and you can see how they had a 71st PV, Pennsylvania Volunteers, on it. There's a very good chance that he was wearing this badge when he was wounded at the Battle of Antietam and then at the Battle of Gettysburg. So just wanted to share a little artifact there with you guys. And this is actually Phillips' grave on the north side of Phoenixville, and which was restored about 10 years ago, And this is a really neat photo of the St. Mary's Women's Club, gathered up on top of what was referred to as Indian Point, which was a ritual area for the Lenape. And they're posed up there, and you can see the beautiful view of the Schuylkill River there and the railroad bridge behind them. Just a neat image I wanted to share with you guys, and depicting some of the women's organizations. So I could talk about the Irish all night, but we need to talk about some other people. So um, this is another pie graph, and now you can see now there's a lot more countries on the right side of this pie graph. So this is from 1891 to 1960, and you got several countries on the right side there that's broken down, and you're going to see a big difference in what we're looking at now in terms of immigrants. And that big orange piece there is Italy. And the Italians also started moving into Phoenixville in large amounts, but they also moved into Tredyffrin areas. And I'm going to specifically talk about one family that moved into Tredyffrin in 1897. The name of Angelo Mioli. This family lived in Tredyffrin and occupied Tredyffrin for a very long time, had stores. Angelo, when he came here from Italy, bought a 20-acre farm and opened up like a country style store inside his house. And it was actually in the little village of Howville within Tredyffrin Township. And Howville is actually one of the earliest villages within Tredyffrin, for reference. And his son, by the name of Nick, also continued the store business, but then he opened up his new location on the corner of 252 and Howville Road. So it's a really interesting dynamic, because you're going to see, especially with Italians and a lot of these Eastern Europeans that we're going to be talking about, a big thing for them was a lot of times it was related to the food. So owning grocery stores, owning different types of stores like butchers and bakers. These are all people who this was their occupation in Europe before coming to the United States, and it would bring all this delicious food to us, which I am so grateful for. So for those who love food, that are really into food, you obviously can relate a lot of things that we eat in our area to this immigration influx, especially in Chester County. And the Italians that lived here, like I said, formed these communities and churches and did those things just like the Irish did. You're going to see that blue on there, Austria-Hungary. So a lot of Hungarians. The purple, the darker purple, is Poland. We're going to be talking about Polish here soon. Czechoslovakia. You still had Irish coming here. There was another influx of Irish immigrants in that time period, especially down in the main line area. And all the way down to like Switzerland and Latvia and Ukraine, Sweden, and Syria, believe it or not. And so you got a lot of interesting dynamics here. And all this is in Chester County. It gives you an idea of how much of a melting pot we are and where we all came from. And I'm sure almost everybody on this call tonight, is probably has some sort of connection to one of those countries, and they like talking about it probably. So, and you're going to hear me talk about my connections. And one of my interests in immigration really is because it has something to do with me personally, and I like talking about it. So I'm talking about my family history at the same time. Here's that Chester County map again. Now this is from that same era, and you can see that where those numbers are, where those yellows are. So where those Italy and your orange. There's that big orange up there. See that? That's Phoenixville. Going over to Spring City. The blue there, you see that Austria-Hungary area. There was a bunch of Hungarians and stuff that went over into Spring City. And I'm sorry about that. And there's Tredyffrin, and there's a big fat orange. There's no other color in there. It was all Italians that went into that area of Tredyffrin. And of course, Easttown, look at the big orange. A lot of that had to do with the Italians that were coming into that area of Tredyffrin and Easttown were working in the quarries in that area. And then you get into other areas of Chester County. A lot of that also had to do with the mushroom farms. You'll go down here, see them, Kennett mushrooms, of course. and then also working in the marble quarries in Chester County. The Italians always had expertise in marble work, and so you're going to see a lot of that in Chester County. Another group of people that were coming into Chester County in that time period were Jewish immigrants, and this is a photo of the Benai synagogue in Phoenixville, their first location, which was located on Main Street. And it was to become the YMCA later on, and it changed a couple times. And now, of course, they have a new synagogue that was built I believe it was in the 60s or early 70s, and that has a large congregation in Phoenixville. So a lot of Jewish immigrants were coming here in that same time period, coming from Eastern Europe, of course. So they were all over Phoenixville and in Chester County as well. So I'm going to show you some cool photos. This is one of my favorites. This is a photo of the Italian immigrants posed inside the Santa Ana Italian Club in Phoenixville, which is still in operation. The guy in the front right, I was friends with, and I know a bunch of other guys that are actually in this photo. A bunch of them have passed now, but this photo was taken in the early 40s, and it's just a really cool photo of them. Most likely, those are wine barrels. Photo of the Italian Club. This is a photo inside a pizza place that was in Phoenixville called Dell's Pizza. Dell's is short for Dell'Aquila. But it's a big name in Phoenixville. It owned restaurants for years and years and years and years. And this is inside their pizza joint, which was located on Bridge Street in Phoenixville. A big thing that became hugely popular in Chester County, like I said, once again, especially in Phoenixville, Spring City, going out down into other parts of Chester County, was boxing. A lot of that had to do with the Irish and then the Italians. And in this photo here is, as you can see, 3 Italians and an Irishman. The guy on the right, John Calcinor, was actually from Royersford. Tommy Marciano was from Phoenixville. Joe Oran was from Phoenixville. Joe Rowan actually became a famous boxer and was a lightweight and middleweight, I believe, boxer, but boxed at Madison Square Garden twice. It televised boxing matches and actually boxed Sugar Ray Robinson. That's a whole other program, so I'm not gonna talk about that. But that's a great photo. Once again, we're going back to the Iron Company in Phoenixville and the Steel Company. So not only did the Iron and Steel Company, as you can see here, sometimes their subsidiary, the Bridge Company, draw people into Phoenixville, but also people in the area, people that also did live in Tredyffrin Township would have worked in the Iron Company in Phoenixville and definitely in Spring City. And then you had a whole bunch of industrial areas in Spring City, like knitting mills and stove making companies in Spring City that drew a lot of immigrants for work. This is a badge that belonged to a good friend of mine who's still living, is my friend Shorty. Shorty is Italian, and he's 95 years old now, World War II veteran. And he gave me his work badge from the Phoenix Bridge Company. And for those, like I said, the Phoenix Bridge Company was a subsidiary of the Iron Company. It was the same location. And so I wanted to share that cool piece with you. Now, we were talking about some other nationalities, and now I'm going to talk about some Polish. And this is where it gets more related to me. Obviously, my name is very Irish. My dad's Irish, but my mom is Polish and German. And my connection to Phoenixville, why I grew up in Phoenixville, was because my family came to Phoenixville from Poland in 1898. So when they came to Phoenixville, also settled on the north side of Phoenixville. And just like all the other ones we just talked about, one of their first goals was to build their own church. And this is a very rare photo postcard in my personal collection. I'm going to try and hold this, like maybe enlarge it for you guys a little bit there, of Holy Trinity Polish Catholic Church, which is located on Dayton Street in Phoenixville. For those who have not been in the church, the inside of the church is incredible. It looks like you're in a church in Poland. That is a photo of the altar that was completely hand carved, that they brought wood over from Poland to build that altar. It's a beautiful, beautiful church. And as you can see on the bottom right, this is, written completely in Polish, taken in 1910. And this was the priest at the time. This would be another priest. This was the first pastor, the first priest of Holy Trinity. That last name is pronounced Januszkiewicz. And the church was opened in 1903, and he's the one who actually purchased the former public school, which was located next to the church and served as the first parochial school, first Catholic school in Phoenixville. Also, along with these churches, they formed fraternal organizations and clubs, and this is a rules book from 1924, like a secretary that would have been a member of this organization for Polish Americans. This actually belonged to my great-grandfather, who served as a secretary in the organization. And here's a photo taken in Phoenixville. And the guy on the right is my great-grandfather. The guy on the left is my great-great-grandfather. My great-grandfather was born in Poland, came here as a very young child. And my great-great-grandfather came here when he was in his 20s. Late 20s. So he's holding a Polish flag, and my great-grandfather's holding an American flag. And this is another photo from my family that's also very early. That's my great-great-grandfather on the second from left, and that baby there is one of his children. And you usually can tell from a lot of these images, a lot of times what their nationalities could be. And you'll see a lot of these great photographs from this time period all over the place. And I think, I'm sure a lot of you maybe have these old, like these era photos, these cool family photos. And, for someone who's really into ancestry and genealogy, you always want these photos to have some sort of writing on the back of them, and they don't always do. So luckily I was able to identify the people in this photograph and from my grandmother. And that's my grandmom right there, who got me really interested in family history and probably had a lot to do with me even giving this talk this evening. This photo was taken in about 1932 in Phoenixville. We're talking about clubs. This is the first Polish American Citizens Club. This was the Polish club that was built in Phoenixville. This building was torn down when they built the new one, which is still open in operation in 1947. Located on the left, you can kind of see it. They already built the building on the left. They would tear this one down not too long after this photo was taken to put the parking lot in. And we go back to stores. Of course, stores and businesses, they would come here and establish their communities and provide grocery to a lot of their own communities. So this guy had a business on the 141 High Street in Phoenixville selling meats, groceries, and provisions. A lot of those meats would most likely be Polish meats like kielbasa and things like that. And so you'll see a lot of ads all over the place for that kind of stuff in this time period. Another club that's in Phoenixville is the Slovak American Club, which is located on the south side of Phoenixville, where a lot of the Slovak population settled. And this was located on the corner of Morgan and Quick Street. And this is for a dinner for the American Federation of Hosiery Workers. The reason I know that is because it belonged to my grandmother. And another set of immigrants that would come into our area are Hungarians. We kind of touched on this a little bit, but a lot of them would settle in, other areas of Chester County, but primarily in northern Chester County, in Phoenixville and Spring City. This is a very early photo of their first church, which was located in Phoenixville. And this was the Hungarian Reformed Church. So they had some Hungarians that came to Phoenixville that were Catholic, and some that came here as a part of the Hungarian Reformation movement. So they came here and built their Hungarian Reformed Church. This church is, they built another one in the 19 teens, which is located on the corner by Reeves Park. And once in a while, they still do their ethnic food sales, which is great. This is a photograph inside the Hungarian Club, which is located in Phoenixville as well. This was the Hungarian Athletic Club. This was taken in 1948, and you'll see, more getting later on. But there's a lot of these families that are still in Phoenixville. So another area that is very interesting is in Spring City, and we're going to talk a little bit about some Spring City stuff right now. So usually when you talk about our area, like we mentioned earlier about immigrants coming from Germany, a lot of times you'll refer to those German immigrants as coming here in the 1700s, which is the most common German immigration in Pennsylvania, definitely in the 1700s. Then you had some more that came here in the 1850s, but mostly 1700s. What we don't hear a lot about is the German immigrants that came to the United States in the 1920s, primarily like mid 1920s and going into the early 1930s. And a lot of them formed a little community in Spring City. And the reason why I'm very interested in this is because this is also my mom's dad's side of the family. So my great grandmother and my great grandfather came from Germany in 1923 and 1925. And the reason why they came here at that time was because of the rise of fascism starting in southeastern Germany in Bavaria. My family was Bavarian. And there was these little squads and groups of people in a country that was trying to push their ideals on the German population. And at this point, this is, Hitler obviously is not in power yet, but he's definitely around and involved in these early groups of what, the pre-SS, like we refer to sometimes as the SA, the brown shirts. And the rise of fascism in not only in Germany, but also in Italy would push more immigrants into the United States and definitely into our area. And my family said, hey, you know what? We don't like this. And they got out. And my great grandfather came over here 2 years before my great grandmother. They wrote to each other. My great grandmom my great grandpa sent a ring to her that my mom has over to Germany. And then when she came over here, they got married. And this is a copy of my great grandfather's naturalization. So some of you, if you've ever seen these, if you have them, it's amazing because one, it gives you a lot of information on your family. And if you have them, definitely cherish them because they're priceless. And this, gives a full description of my great grandfather. And as you can see, he was actually, of course, they would be naturalized in Chester County. They would be naturalized in Westchester, being the county seat. But they lived in Spring City. Over on the left, where he signs his name, it's kind of interesting. So when he came through Ellis Island, he changed, his name was changed to Fox, Fox. The name was actually Fuchs, Fuchs. And but he's still signing his name like that in 1940. Or 1943, I'm sorry. I think some of you might be able to put two and two together here. So he became a naturalized citizen. He was already living here for 20 years before he became a naturalized citizen, which was very, very common for these immigrants that were coming to the United States. They didn't become citizens for 40 years or more sometimes. And what forced him to become a United States citizen was World War II. So 1943 is happening, and he's German. I think you realize what's going on here. And he was actually worried about being deported out of the United States back to Germany because they were the enemy. And so that's why he became a United States citizen during World War II. And you had a lot of that. I'm going to get into that a little bit here in a couple minutes, but um, this is a passport that you would see commonly. That this actually belonged to my great grandmother, Carolina, and she came here and it has, will have their basic information, their birthday and stuff like that, where they came from, and their passport photo. And of course, Deutsches Reich, and it's going to let you know that they're German. And you know, when you talk about having a very close connection, in that time period, you also had Germans that were coming here in the Spring City in the 1920s. You were coming here right after World War One, where we were fighting the Germans, and now you're coming into World War Two. Yeah, kind of tough. Being here, that why you left that country to get away from things like that, and now you got to worry about you got to watch your, in other words, watch your back and worry about that kind of thing. Excuse me, this is a photograph of my great great uncle. So that's my great grandmom's brother, Joseph, who was actually in the German army in World War One, and he came to Spring City in 1929. And so here's a World War One German veteran who's coming to the United States to open up a shoe store, and he obviously never talked about his service in the German army, and it was just something that they enlisted in, especially in World War One, to fight for their country. It was less of not like World War Two when it comes to us fighting the Germans. So it's a little bit different atmosphere there. But this is his business card, and as you can see, his name's on there, but he still used underneath his name there. You can see German American shoemaker, which I always thought was very, very cool. My family held their German traditions, and I learned a lot of that stuff from my great grandma. Luckily, my great grandma lived until I was 17 years old, and so I got to learn a lot about her experience coming here from Ellis Island, and coming here as an immigrant and living here during World War II and all that kind of stuff. I was lucky to be able to experience that. And this is actually a sign from his store. The sign dates about the 1930s, early 40s. Now, going back to what we're talking about, growing up as an immigrant, all these immigrants had at some sort of tough time, and you would think that a lot of them would learn from each other, but a lot of times they don't. And the immigrants that were coming here, like from Ireland, when the Irish came here, they had the hardest time ever. They were discriminated on because they were Catholic. They were discriminated on because they were a new type of immigrant coming from a country that was not very common here yet. And they, weren't hired for jobs, and had a rough time of it. And that's why a lot of times these immigrants, when they were coming here, would form their own little communities, just like they do now, and to kind of, stick together, watch over each other, and help each other during that time of development in a new country. And here's the Irish who went through that whole thing. But then, when you have immigrants coming here in the late 1800s from Italy and Germany and Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Ukraine and all this other stuff, now the Irish were doing it to them and wouldn't let them in their church. And then vice versa. And it just kind of continues down the chain. You would think that people would just learn from each other once and understand that these people are just coming here for most generally, usually for some sort of freedom, and live in the United States. And so going back to the German stuff coming into the Spring City in the 1920s. This is a photograph of my pop-up, Otto, and he was born in 1928. So as you think, he was a young man. He was in high school during World War II, and he was so worried about being picked on, being 100% German, but he's born here as a United States citizen. But his first name's Otto, and he actually would tell people in school that his name was Joe, which was his middle name. And a lot of people knew him as Joe for years and years and years, including my great grandmom when she first met him. When my grandmom introduced him, she said, his name's Joe, and she called him Joe for years. And eventually that name Otto came back, and I love that name. I was very close with my pup up. So, but growing up in that time period, this is, you're talking 1940s, that he was worried about, getting bullied in school because of his first name. And so, that kind of thing continued, throughout all these years, different, eras of even back in the 1700s for sure. So, you know, it's an interesting subject, and you can go on and on about that kind of thing. But um, I'll put this on here because that's a photo of me with him, and the history of immigrants. Like I said, you can do a whole talk just on the Irish, or just on the Polish, or the Italians, or the Welsh. So trying to condense it in this period, trying to really kind of cover a lot for you guys, and condense it down. And so, feel free to ask questions too afterwards. If you say, "Hey, Ryan, what do you know? What do you know about if I didn't talk much about the Ukrainians, or if I didn't do this, feel free to include that in any questions that you might have, and do my best to try and answer those for you." But yeah, so going into how our obviously our culture was affected by all this. You have so many nationalities in northern Chester County, and it's just a big melting pot in a very small little area. I mean, look how close we are from Phoenixville to Spring City and Tredyffrin. We're all very, very closely connected, not that far away at all. And all these immigrants brought their food in, and the yeah, like I said earlier, that's one of the things I'm most grateful for. So we can sit here and go and get Italian food, or we can get Polish food, or German food, or whatever it might be. And now, with later immigration coming into Chester County, we have a large population of Asian Americans, Indian Americans, and of course, Hispanic Americans. That these populations of Latin countries, from all over, like Guatemala and Mexico, and stuff like that, is our most recent connection to this kind of thing. And I truly believe if you look at what they do now, it's almost exactly like what our ancestors and my descendants did when they came from Poland. They came here, they worked their butts off, lived in their little communities, and had to adapt to a new culture. And Chester County, of course, has a large population of Hispanics in that work on the mushroom farms down in Kennett. And it's literally exactly what the Italians did when they came down there to work on the mushroom farms in Kennett. So, you can always relate immigration usually to another time period. And so it's just a really cool subject. And this is going to be my last photo on my slide. Once again, you can use me as an example as a melting pot, because I am Irish, German, Polish, and a little Czechoslovakian. And but this is a photograph actually of me and my sister, with my great grandmom, who I referenced multiple times. My great grandmom Carolina, who was from Germany. My sister there had a little girl a couple years ago and named her Carolina after my great grandmom. So, I'm a poster child for a southeastern Pennsylvania guy in his 30s. So, but I'm going to jump into maybe some questions. I think we have. I saw one pop up that I can go to right away. I saw one asking about the Swiss in the area. So the Swiss in our area is very similar to the Germans. So when you had a little combination of these German and Swiss that came into Philadelphia, definitely into, and I'll answer that question. Hi, Helen. And I'll answer that question after this one. The Swiss were always very, especially in certain areas of Switzerland, were obviously very close to Germans, especially my family being from Bavaria. You're near the Swiss border. So there were a lot of Swiss immigrants that came over with the German immigrants in the 1700s, settled the same areas. There's a lot of times there's like this, when you talk about the Pennsylvania Dutch or the Pennsylvania Germans, a lot of them were also Swiss. And uh, they weren't necessarily technically German, but they spoke German. So a lot of times the Swiss were mixed in there with the German immigrants that came here to the United States. So same concept, same areas, a lot of times the same language, depending where they're from in Switzerland. That's the best way I can answer that one. Helen asked about why do people change their last names? That's a very good question. So number one, a lot of people changed their last names because they wanted to identify with their new country of America and try and change their name into a more English name. Sometimes they did that on their own, like my great grandfather, who changed it from Fuchs to Fox. I mean, Fox is sounds like a very English name, you know, and but that's why he did it, and that was a big reason. And sometimes it was clerical. So when you do this genealogy, you'll see, like, especially Italian last names, you will see this name spelled like 7 different ways, and it drives you nuts when I'm trying to do genealogy for some Italian friends of mine, because you will see that name spelled so many different ways. And a lot of times that's because um, it just got misspelled on documents by random people, like census takers, naturalization papers. When it came over here to the United States through Ellis Island, you talk about hundreds of people coming in, and some guy just sitting there with a book writing your name in there. This is some random dude who's now going to have to try and spell um, the all these different nationality names. Of course they're going to make mistakes, and sometimes they would just take liberty with it and just be like, you know what, this is your new name now. And that happened. And I'm talking like changing a name from, like, some like hardcore Italian name or Hungarian name, like a friend of mine's family did. Their last name was Kovac, from Phoenixville, and his great grandfather, when he went in the U.S. Army in World War I, changed his last name to Smith, like the most common name ever. So trying to research that guy is can be a pain in the butt. So the that's some explanation to name changes. And I've seen everything from just like going in the army in World War II, where the family had lived here already like 40 years or something from Poland. The guy enlisted in the army, and they changed one letter of the last spelling of their last name, from an I to a Y, and now all of a sudden that's how he spells his name. So it can be very simple like that, and sometimes, like I said, it would be something simple like that, or sometimes they changed it out of fear, of maybe being discriminated against. And you'll see that a lot of times with Polish names, where they can really shorten them, and stuff like that. So
What was the local established population's reception to the Irish immigrants in the mid 1800s compared to European immigrants in the late 1800 to early 1900s?
it's a good question. So definitely some similarities, to having a rough time of it. As you know, like I said, in the middle of 1800s, when the Irish were coming here, they really took a beating, and were not hired for jobs, or they had no choice and were forced to be hired for very cheap, hard labor. As an area that's not too far from the areas we're talking about. You had an area called like Duffy's Cut, which is, these guys were railroad workers, all Irish, that were dying for different reasons, and some of them were very suspicious, and they buried them in a massive grave, next to the railroad. And um, the graves weren't even marked because they thought of them as just whatever, and it's really sad when you see stuff like that. um, Compare that to later 1800s Eastern Europeans. At least you didn't see that kind of thing too much, where they were able to have a little more of an established community without too much of a pushback, but there definitely was pushback on those Eastern Europeans. And like I said, ironically, a lot of it was coming from the Irish, which you think they would have learned their lesson and been nice to the other new people. And but yeah, there's a story. I'll give you an example in Phoenixville, St. Mary's Church, very Irish. Late 1800s come. You had the early Polish coming into Phoenixville, and they wanted to go to church. That's all they wanted. They just wanted to go to church. Well, the Irish would not let them go into St. Mary's, and so the Polish were forced to go to other churches until they could build their own church. So, and then you'll see the Irish doing that, but then the Polish were pretty nice to the Italians. And so you'll see that where, because the Italians had the same exact thing, they said, hey, we don't have a church yet. We want to go to St. Mary's, but they're not letting us in. So the Polish actually married and baptized the first Italians that came into Phoenixville in their church. So you'll see kind of a little bit of both there.
Many churches in the Vincents of United Church of Christ denomination. Was this denomination related to the concentration of German immigrants in that area?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. So the UCC church would have originally been a German Reformed denomination, which, of course, all UCC churches were either some sort of Reformed church, either German or Hungarian. But mostly in our area, you're going to see all those UCC churches, like the one in Spring City was originally a German Reformed church. And the one in Vincent, I know exactly what you're talking about, explored that cemetery many times. That was because of the heavy influence of Germans in that area. So you had, of course, you have the Vincent, UCC, which is German Reformed, and then you had the Lutheran Church. And not too far from there, you had Zion Lutheran Church on 724, which is still, it's still there, of course, which is real early church, established by the early Lutherans that were coming into Pennsylvania in the early 1700s. So yes, absolutely, that's a good question.
There was another one that came through Q&A from Chris Rivard. Did your family carry the original German spelling or the name Fox down through more current generations?
Once my great grandfather changed it to FOX, that's what it's been since then. So, I said originally it would have been FUCHS, and when he changed it to Fox, that's what it's been since. So there's been no ever change back or anything. See someone. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, you may have seen the same question. Someone is asking both in the chat and the Q&A if you spoke of James Anderson, 1695.
I did not. But I do know that's such an early name. The Anderson name is really early in our area, all over the place. One of the first families in the Phoenixville area where it was the Anderson family. You had the Anderson farm with the Anderson. Yep, there you go. First white settler in Chester County. Yep. So the Anderson family plot, which is really cool. And I know a handful of Anderson descendants still in Chester County, which is really, really cool. A lady who was related to them, who's two great grandfathers. She was an older lady. Two great grandfathers was one of the Andersons that was an officer in the Revolutionary War in the Chester County Militia Unit. So really prominent name in Chester County. Thanks for pointing that out. Yep, and great grandfather Samuel Pennypacker. Great, awesome. Absolutely. So I see another question. I just realized I can read some of these for myself. Did the Revolutionary War greatly shift who owned and settled in Chester County? I mean, probably maybe a little bit. I mean, so by the Revolutionary War, like I said, it was in that time period where by the Rev War started in Chester County, you had a lot of these early populations already settled, and then some more coming in to those areas, in the 1700s. But you had a lot of this, of course, the Quakers and the Mennonites and a lot of the Germans. um, huge amounts of Germans that fought, in the Continental Army or these Chester County militia units, Scotch Irish and stuff like that. And so, there was another influx of Germans that came into the United States in the late 1700s after the Rev War. And which is really interesting too, because when you talk about Rev War history, you know, the Germans really populated a huge amount of our soldiers in especially in the Pennsylvania militia units. My goodness, and which is funny because of course they wound up fighting the Prussians. So so you had once again, the Prussians of German descent coming over here from Europe, fighting their own German descendants. So, but yeah, I think the Rev War, that period, you already had a lot of those people here already. So it was a big gap in between. You did have a lot of Irish that fought in the Continental Army, but a lot of them were Irish Quakers, so they really didn't contribute to the Irish communities that would start up later on in the mid 1800s. But I'm sure it definitely helped. We have such a prominent German area that as some of the Germans that were coming here even in the 1800s knew, oh yeah, well, Pennsylvania is very German. Like that was something you'll see. Just a quick reference. A pretty cool story is that during World War II, they purposely, the U.S. Army knew that southeastern Pennsylvania had such a huge population of Germans that they looked for translators in like areas in our area, especially in like Lancaster County and Berks County. A lot of U.S. Army soldiers from that area that served as German translators in Europe because of such our reputation of having so many of that dominant population of German Americans. So our area definitely contributed to a lot of different things like randomly like that, which is pretty neat. Any other questions pop up? I see that question. That's my cousin, Monica. Asked me if I have any of my great grandmom Fox's, which is Carolina's, recipes. She used to make a great German potato salad. Well, I'm glad you said that, Monica, because yes, we do have her recipes, and my dad copies that German potato salad to a T. So you might want to come over sometime and get some. So, but yeah, no, my dad makes her recipe, her German potato salad recipe, to a T. It's great. And for those, this is a whole other subject that I could talk about, but the differences in food culture even within those countries themselves. My great grandma makes German potato salad the way that they make it in Bavaria, with vinegar, parsley, and bacon, and it's served cold. So other parts of Germany don't use vinegar or they don't use bacon. So, but I'm obviously biased. I think that's the best way. But yeah, that's a good question. I know Monica, my sister Brittany has one of my mom Caroline's recipe books that's written in German that she brought over here with her from Germany.
I think there was, we have some people saying thank you in the Q&A. Let me check the Facebook stream. Looks like we do have one question, and I think you may have gone over this, but from Facebook, someone is asking, what was the largest group to come to Phoenixville?
Oh boy. Well, I guess generally you could say it would be the Irish. Um, um, and it's close, but definitely because there were so many Irish that came here to Phoenixville in the mid 1800s, there was a lot of them. And but then I'd say you got your close second would definitely be Italians and Polish. And and then in Tredyffrin, definitely Italians. And you'll see that sometimes in areas where when we looked at that map, where the only color in Tredyffrin was a big green circle, and it was just all Italians that came there. So sometimes you'll see that in Chester County where you'll just see like one nationality. And then you got an area like Phoenixville, which had like 5 million of them. So, one time we had a Polish church, Ukrainian church, Italian church slash Irish, a Slovak church, and a Hungarian church. So, and then you had an Orthodox church that was non-Roman Catholic that had, a mix of any of the ones that were not Roman Catholic went to the Orthodox church. So you had a bunch of like Lithuanians and stuff from like Eastern European countries. So yeah, when you talk about a melting pot, Phoenixville is literally the prime example. And um, oh, one thing I wanted to point out too, like when I worked with the exhibit at Chester County Historical Society, for those who don't know, right now they are finishing up their brand new renovation of their main exhibit space, which is going to be incredible. Cost fundraising of millions to do this, and it's going to be super interactive, and it's going to be awesome. And I helped a little bit with that, and I think what will be really interesting for people is what they tried to do is they definitely focused a lot on immigration. So a lot of the stuff I'm talking about is going to be featured in this exhibit because that is Chester County. And so we did this little video project through Westchester University where they sat two people down that were almost like they were connected to each other in some way, but almost like opposites when it comes to where they came from. And we just had a discussion. And, you know, um, luckily mine was with the mayor of Phoenixville, Peter, who is, came to Phoenixville not until the late 90s. And his mom's Filipino and his dad's Swiss. And then you have me, who's been here a little bit longer, but we sat down with each other and talked about that. And so those video features are going to be actually in the exhibit. And they did, I think, like 10 or 12 different types of people and different connections and backgrounds. So definitely check that out. Keep an eye on when that opens, which should be very soon. And if those are interested in that, you're going to get a really good experience there. So, and I'm probably going to, and in the beginning there, we talked about my show, filming some more episodes soon. And, I'll definitely be doing an episode. You guys are going to get the info before anybody else, but I'm going to do an episode on some of these nationalities, like full episodes. So it'll be one like on the Polish in Phoenixville or the Italians in Phoenixville. So, check that out if you're, and I saw a lot of Phoenixville people tuned in here, and I know those nationalities for sure that were tuned in. So I think, you like it. Any more questions pop in there? I guess we're probably just about done. Those are just some comments. Yeah. But yeah, just want to say, thanks everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And maybe we'll do another one for True Different if they have me back. And we'll pick another subject that's very different than this one. So we'll kind of touch on different things. So, but yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And thank you
All right.
everyone for joining.